We are live. Welcome back.
All right. And welcome to Lifestyle Business on LaunchPad TV with
Chris
and Ann. And we are, good morning. It is morning here because we are coming to you from our latest location.
Our latest COVID
fire
COVID-cation.
evacuation location of Hawaii.
So it's bright and early.
Bright and early.
9 a.m. for us, later for everybody else. But we're glad to be with you today.
Yeah, don't feel bad for us at all. We are lucky to be here. And what we're doing is we're just testing out all the COVID protocols for places around the world or around North America. And this one was pretty interesting. And we actually did a test before we got on the plane. And it's kind of neat. Hawaii's got it dialed in.
Yep. And so, speaking to our guest, and you'll introduce our guest in a few minutes here, we've also sort of made this commitment to try to maximize this year with our daughter. We have a daughter, 2-year-old daughter, Harper, and we're really trying to maximize the time with her. And her godparents invited us to come visit them in Hawaii. And since we visited the rest of her family in Canada and North Carolina, we decided, hey, why not?
We'll make the sacrifice.
Yeah. So like you said, don't feel bad for us, but we're glad to be here. And it's been an interesting year, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we've been thinking about is she's 2. So obviously we have a long road ahead of us in terms of having to work hard to be able to put her through school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really hard right now to make moves from a business perspective because of COVID. Not going to say that it's easy. It's not bright. I don't know if you guys in Newark, we all know we had a bit of a spike this weekend. So, but nonetheless, we call ourselves cockroaches. So we will survive through this issue. And so as a result, we're kind of like, well, what can we do? We have to be virtual. So we might as well be virtual and see people and connect with others, which is great. But we have also been having a lot of conversations with people about the future of work. And where it's going. And so we are going to be talking about parenting with Chris Boudy. Boudy. Canadian. It's my Canadian accent, Chris. But nonetheless, we'll be speaking to him about being a great parent.
Yep.
We've been listening to his podcast. We've learned a few things. We have a lot of learning to go. And, but we've also been talking to other people about the future of work. And so, one of our competitors is, there are many competitors in the space, but one of them is struggling right now. They raised a lot of money, but they have a lot of lawsuits out there with their landlords and haven't been able to come to a good thing. I think we've
avoided those so far.
We have managed to avoid them. I mean, I would say we avoided them.
Yeah.
But, it has been interesting because I think what we are realizing is in this space and in the category, survival is necessary. And so we're focused on survival through this phase, but we're really excited about the future because I think as a category, co-working is here to stay, obviously, but it has also been proven that the future of work needs to have a hybrid approach to work. Yeah.
I mean, we've been having a number of conversations, sort of future looking. What's 2021 like? What's sort of the return to the workplace look like? Particularly with teams that we know at some of the Silicon Valley companies, Genentech, some of the other big companies, Facebook and Twitter, and it's becoming clear that people are taking a lot during this time. One thing that people are learning and sort of as they're working at home is the commute is a problem, and people don't want to commute for 2 hours to get to work again every day. Genentech has actually opened up co-working spaces at the bus stations where it would normally pick up its workforce and take them to work. And I think most people that we are talking to that are making real estate decisions are thinking 50% capacity teams. There will be much more flexibility,
Hot
lot of
desks.
hot desks, bookable space, collaborative workspace. There's the balance is basically we need to see each other in person. We know that's important. We want to see each other in person. You want to see your coworkers. You want to see community. That's actually what LaunchPad, that's the foundation of LaunchPad is working around people you care about and you like and building community. But does that need to be every day? The compliance oriented, I need to be sitting at my desk 9 to 5. That's sort of out the window, right? That's no good managers in the future are going to manage that way. You want to bring your team together for relationship building, for creativity, for strategy, for planning. But then a lot of day-to-day work people can get done in their own environments, whether that's at home or a co-working space. Right?
Well, I thought that was interesting. On the flip side, we were chatting with folks who. The asset manager, let's say, of the real estate fund is like, no, don't worry. Real estate's here to stay. And people are going to need to build culture. And that's what happens in the workforce.
Yeah.
And what happens in the workplace. And in my 20 years of building culture in companies, the reality is that the office does not create the culture. What creates the culture is how you make decisions, how you treat your employees, how you recognize performance, all of the factors that go into it. The workplace maybe helps it. But someone once at Google said, culture and brand is kind of like the core of how we make decisions. So when you go to a restaurant, that's the main meal, right? But the coffee bar and the free food and the free lunch and the shuttles are the bread. You don't go to the restaurant for the bread. You go to the restaurant for the meal. And the meal is really around how we actually work together. And so I think it's easy to paint it and say, oh, culture, well, you need to do that to support culture. And what we would argue is that culture can be created anywhere. And it certainly can be created virtually because it's how you make decisions as a company. But more importantly, what matters now is about building relationship. And seeing your colleague from 9 to 5 is a very easy way to think you're building relationship. And now, like we heard from Ari last week, intentionality about relationship actually really matters, which means you don't have to be in the office, you don't have to be in the same city, you don't have to be in the same place, but you actually have to think about how am I building relationships with my team, with my employees, with my kids. And at the end of the day, relationship matters, and that can be created in person or not in person, but it's certainly not created because we all sit at the same desk from 9 to 5.
Right. Exactly.
So I think that's one of the themes. And I just, it's always fun when people are like, well, my real estate guy told me that people are going to get back to the office because of culture. And I was like, well, your real estate guy doesn't talk to his customer again after he signs the lease. And we're hearing from our hundreds of customers that life is going to be different and we're not going back to the way it was. And why would we? We get the opportunity to be better parents. We get the opportunity to be better spouses. We get the opportunity to actually take care of our own personal life and have that work-life balance and integration that we've been always begging for. So, the reality is that the future's here.
Yeah.
So we will survive for the next chapter.
Talk to our guest a little bit about that, Chris Boudy. He's a technologist, and I think one of the things that technology now, we've had this moment where we all have adapted it. Here we are, we're broadcasting live at a house over Wi-Fi. People are working over Zoom. One of the things he talks about on his podcast is virtual schooling and how that's been going in his family and some tips around that. But let's get into some member magic about the LaunchPad communities, and then we'll bring Chris in.
Great.
You want to kick off?
Okay. Ari Robin from last week, who we all were happy to spend time. He's the founder of phone.com, and he was recently featured in business.com's article where he shared some tips to decrease customer churn from dissatisfied customers during COVID.
Awesome. And RWJ Barnabas Health has launched an initiative to boost the well-being of its healthcare workforce that includes one of our members, MindRight. They are providing staff and members and their family with access to the MindRight app led by Ashley Edwards. MindRight is a coaching opportunity for teens and young adults to enroll in culturally responsive and trauma-informed coaching programs via text messaging. And she's awesome. And we've talked about this previously. She's one of 20 African-American women who have raised over $1 million. Her startup's doing great. We're so proud of her and excited to have her as a LaunchPad member.
I feel like we have more news about Ashley every week, and it's new and different news. So.
By the way, that's how you know startups are just rocking.
When it's just like
you hit the news
boom,
cycle every week.
Every week.
All right.
And then congratulations are in order for founder Tara Williams. Her organization, Brick City Bricks for Kids, was recently awarded one of 10 small business recovery grants sponsored by Columbia Bank. The grants are going to fund personal protective equipment costs, working capital, nutrition programs, and the rehiring of furloughed employees. So congrats to Tara Williams. And let's move over to Nashville.
All right. And over in Nashville, we're welcoming in Brian Lasinga from Nitra Security in Nashville. Nitra Security offers a variety of technology consulting services, including IT security, systems architecture, and web development. But they specialize in cybersecurity and data communications, privacy, and auditing.
All right, let's do it.
Welcome to Brian.
And now, without further ado, creative director, technologist, filmmaker, master gardener, Saints fan, and podcast host are just a few of the titles that Chris Boudy holds, but none mean as much to him as the title of dad. Chris is here to talk to us about his professional journey in the world of NOLA tech and how he's merged that experience with the lessons he's learned from fatherhood to turn them into a winning podcast. Chris, welcome.
Right. Hello, Chris. Welcome. Hey. Lifestyle business. It's good to see you.
Chris, look, first of all, how long has it been, man? Like, it's been too long, but here's the right. So look, I follow you guys on Instagram. So I haven't seen you personally in 5-7 years, but yeah. I do follow all the antics of you in Canada and the baby. And I'm like, oh, Chris and Annie, they in Canada on a boat. So I am following you guys live very closely. So, and it's
that's great.
Introduction. I need to get that in lights over my head one day. So thank you for that introduction.
All right, we'll send it to you.
Well, that's so great. And Chris, yeah, like you said, we haven't seen each other in person in a while, but we go back a long way. You know, both sort of OG part of the New Orleans tech community way back when, post Katrina. You know, Net Squared. So it's a pleasure to be back with you and. Has been fun. You know, the feeling is mutual. I've loved watching your career and everything you're doing. And I particularly excited about your Becoming a Great Dad podcast because I'm recently a dad. I know you're a father, and I've been listening to it and enjoying it. So
I thought I was the dad.
Why are you the dad? Oh, I'm the.
No.
Well, I think it's applicable for all kinds of parents. It's not dad specific, but it is helpful to be a great dad. But tell us a little bit about sort of the genesis of this and what you're doing with it, and we can get into some of the specific topics.
Yeah, no, sure. Well, and like you were saying, and because of COVID, I think that a lot of us have realized, that there was a shift, and the shift really was for me in that and this was starting back in March, right? I started to work from home, and because I work in technology, a lot of the work that my staff and I do, we can do, if not 99%, more 100%. So I was finding myself just having just a bunch of extra time on my hands, right? There was no commute, right? I could get up at 7 o'clock, exercise, yoga, walk the dog, and still be on time for virtual work. And so the genesis really came out of one thing I noticed was that, the more and more time I put into my career for technology, I also have to balance that out with being creative, right? So I'm a pure computer science, technology guy, web designer guy, very logical, very left brain, but I have to balance that out with creative projects so I feel fulfilled, right? Me getting up, going to work, that serves a purpose. Like, I truly believe my purpose in life is to help people, and my skill set is technology. So I love helping with technology, but that's a purpose. I need fulfillment. And the fulfillment for me was, for example, doing things like the Boudy Gardens, where we had COVID and downtime, and my two sons and I started a backyard community garden. And then out of that, I said, well, what else can I do to put this fuel? And the genesis of this, Chris, was I really wanted to write a book about fatherhood some years ago. And my wife, you may have known, super intelligent, super talented, told me, I don't think it's a good time yet. And I've been married now for 7 years, and I've learned when your wife speaks, you listen, right? So I said, got it, babe. I'm gonna take the heat of it. But the book idea kept itching at me. And so I woke up one day and I said, you know what? I could really take all this knowledge, right, that I have about fatherhood, and maybe I could use a different platform. And the podcast, I previously had done podcasts before, so it was natural for me. So I said, I'm gonna try this podcast platform. And I tell people I personally can really bring, right? We have 4 kids. Their ages are 21, 14, 7, and 2. So I can give you experience, Ann and Chris and somebody listening. I can give you experience from top to bottom. I will wake up on a given day and I will deal with the complex issues of a young adult. I will then deal with the complex needs of a 14-year-old boy trying to figure his way out in the world, dealing with girls, being an African man. I then have a 7-year-old son who's rambunctious. He loves science. He's asking questions. And then, I have a 2-year-old who's a firecracker. She's a young lady, and she's just, she keeps me on my toes. So, I felt like I could give dads, right? And yes, it's called Becoming a Great Dad. Like Ann said, a lot of the information on the podcast is really for both parents. I have a lot of women that contact me and say, look, Chris, I am going to put these skills in place in my household, right? It's to me, has really been something helpful. But the other piece too is that I found that I thought, you know what, I'll put this podcast out and this will help. My immediate kind of need was to really help Black dads. I think as African-American men, we really struggle sometimes. There's no book, there's no workshop. As men in general, we don't really like talking to each other. So my niche goal first was to reach Black dads, but it has then spawned to just everywhere. I've even had on my previous, I think, show, there was a dad from South Africa, and he sent me a message, and he was just so elated that I was able to share the wisdom with him. He was a new father, and just to know that this podcast is reaching across the states is phenomenal.
And it's interesting that so I made that comment to Chris when we were listening to the podcast. I was like, there are a couple, I think you were talking about Juneteenth was one of the episodes that we were talking about. And I was like, it's also really nice to hear a podcast that's, well, frankly, not some sort of white privileged guy talking about their particular challenges. Right. And I think it's interesting that it's a good platform that makes access available. And so now we can have a diversity of voices, but everybody can learn from that. And especially this last summer, I had several conversations with people around how do we address some of these issues. Mm-hmm. And it's a really nice thing because that's really attractive to everyone to basically learn other people's perspectives. And so I think you're right. You're filling a void, but you're also, I think we can always learn collectively when we learn from others and actually really understand their perspectives. Yeah. So I loved that. And honestly, there's so many of there's so many books out there. You should write the book, but now what you can do is you can take the podcast, turn it into the book, and you don't have to go into a cave every single day for.
And that's exactly. And that's exactly what happened. About, I would say, so I think right now I'm about 9 or 10 episodes in, and in the middle, I said I could just take the notes from the podcast, make it a book. So like, right. I actually started the process of and I wrote and so far the goal for me is I want to come out with probably at least 2 seasons, 24 episodes, and then take the episodes and then in the book really expound on the topics. The podcast, I mean, really, right? We don't have enough time in the podcast, but the podcast is really there for parents and for dads and for moms to get information. I tell people I'm not a podcast listener, right? It's funny, I don't listen to podcasts, but I do know as a technology person, I like to get information, get it out, right? My podcasts are 30, 40 minutes long. I'm getting right to the point, but I also want to give you, and this, Chris, kind of comes from my old days of being the IT project manager. I want to give you some action items to take away that you can actually do in your home when you stop listening until next time. But I want to use the book and to really go more in depth because I think a lot of topics, and just talking about the one of how you create family culture, right? I think there's a lot of topics where family culture and tradition, I think for our generation, was just something that just happened. But like you said, we now have to be more intentional about that. And we have to be more intentional in this day and age where race and gender and all these things are at the forefront. We really have to be intentional about how we teach our kids. I strongly believe that the things that are wrong with the world, that's a learned behavior, you know? And so how can I as a parent, how can I be intentional about breaking that cycle and teaching my boys and girls so that when they become adults, they don't have the views, whether directly or indirectly, of being sexist, bigotry, all that stuff. But I think I do hope the book can really go in depth and really help dads and parents really to see more. Hey, how can I really be the catalyst to make that shift in my family?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, Chris. And you're talking about learned behaviors, and we were listening to the episode on racial injustice, and I was sharing that with Ann a little bit this morning. And that was sort of your first pillar, right? You recognize that as soon as you walk in the door and you're around your kids, everything that you're doing, everything that comes out of your mouth, all of your viewpoints they're a sponge, right? They're pulling all of that in, they're learning that, they're witnessing that. And so the, breaking some of these, really societal injustices, right? And that are systemic and that are generational. A great starting point is with our own family, right? With our own children, with our own daughter. And to your point, and you made this point in the podcast, that's not only the responsibility of you as a Black father, that's also the responsibility of me as a white father and us as a white family to have the same conversation with Harper. And we've talked about that with other guests who have been on the podcast this summer. Mitch Landrew said, that it's really important, with where we are right now, that, white families are having these conversations because Black families have been having them for years. Black families, you talk about your son, how you say, go ride your bike around the neighborhood, but I need to talk to you about what you're wearing, even wearing a hoodie, those kind of things, it's unfortunate, but you're forced to have those conversations because you're a father and you want to keep them safe.
Which is why we have to have the conversations too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the great thing I tell people, the people have, I think some months ago, right, people approached me and said, look, I'm not a Black dad, but how can I start to teach my children or turn the wheel? I tell dads, look, right, if you can start to teach your kids about, and I think one thing I kind of talked about in that episode was spotlighting, right? And this is not just a racial thing, this is something that can be a sexist thing, right? If you teach Harper, and if she grows up, and if she has the knowledge to say, wait a minute, that's not right. you, like somebody else, you should not be treating that person differently, right? Now, not only does my African American daughter or son, not only do they know how to handle themselves, but then they have an ally. So even though that's not affecting Harper directly, she can be an ally against injustice. She can stand up and say, "Hey, wait a minute, right? I was taught differently. You shouldn't treat people differently because of it." Those are the kind of things, and I do try to tip the conversation specifically towards Black dads, but I also remind people that these lessons can really be utilized anywhere.
Right.
Well, and I think there's also a notion of, you're right, which is you have to consciously teach the lesson and then you have to live the lesson, right? And Harper's not going to be, we'll just pick on Harper. Harper's not going to stand up and be that person with the spotlight and that ally if we also don't, right? It's one thing to say, be nice to everyone and everyone's equal. But if we don't actually go and do the same thing and challenge and choose our friends because they also, and challenge our friends when they don't necessarily understand or see that. Like, we all share in the fight for any of these issues. And we need to show Harper that when there's an issue about race, gender, just bullying, anything, that we actually have to stand up and advocate and be the supporter, point it out and support the other person. And I think it's interesting because just doing your podcast, it's probably causing you a moment where you're not only doing it, but then you're internalizing it, you're demonstrating it, and you're actually acknowledging the work you do, which is really kind of cool, right?
Yeah, no, I know. I can't tell you how many times I recorded an episode. And look, I always, on the episodes, I try to be transparent, right? Right. I am learning still to be a great dad, right? But there are times when I record and say, yeah, I really didn't do a good job. I preached it to other dads, but I need to go back in my little toolbox and make some notes for Chris Boudy. So like I definitely had those epiphany moments, but it's also and so I think I talked about this, I think in the beginning episodes, in the book actually, and I've written the first chapter of it. I spend a lot of time and I talk to a lot of dads, and their first question is like, "Hey Chris, like, what can I start doing like now, like today?" You've been right. And people always think it's, oh, spend more quality time. Look, I'm like, no. I'm like, you need to spend some weeks and some months on the internal growth of you, right? I spend a lot of time in the book talking about the first step to becoming a great dad is looking inside yourself and really laying that out and saying, wow, these are my flaws. Where do these flaws come from? What are my hangups? What was my dad like? What was my learning? What was my environment? Because if you try to just jump in with your knowledge and not dissecting yourself, that is false faith. So like, I spent a great deal of time picking apart. I mean, even in going back to the podcast about the injustice, I talked about a story about my grandfather. My grandfather, was 65, grew up, he was born in the 30s, grew up in a very racially charged time. And so my grandfather, unbeknownst to him, would say words and would say demeanor that I later learned were wrong. Like he was saying races that were wrong. And so I started to realize, wait a minute, did I pick up some of them views from he's my grandfather. To me, he's a hero. But like the way I view other races and people, or the words that I say around my kids, not around my kids, or the jokes I tell, right? Do I have a warped view of things? So like I really had to dissect myself. And there's a lot of personal growth again, right? Moms, dads, all parents. There's a lot of personal growth that you have to start. And really, I think the first page of the book says, look, this is work, dads. If you are not ready to work on yourself, put the book down, Thank you for buying it. but I appreciate the sale. But if you are not ready, this may be one of the hardest things you do in your entire life, because you have to work on that personal growth of yourself before you can even talk about going from from good to great.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because you can often think about like a business book or a parenting book as a series of tips and tricks to help you sort of solve the problem. And here's the best practices that you might want to do. But actually, at the end of the day, so much of ourselves just comes through. And so you can do all the right tips and tricks, but if you're not sort of thinking about what your presence is and how you're projecting, it's going to be challenging. My book, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt Chris for a second because that's what I do. But my book would be all the things that I probably should have done differently.
I think I'm going to rename the first chapter, and the problem is you. Chapter 1.
There you go.
Problem is you, Dad.
Well, Chris, I love that, and again, that's that same episode as the story you're telling, and I actually love you're a very good podcast producer because I love the story time. Stories, but it makes it very personal to hear about your own experience and the story about your grandfather and the injustice that he went through, at the deli, and listen to the podcast and you'll hear that story from Chris. But let's shift to another topic. Let's talk about family meetings. I'm guessing my mom is watching, and one of the things that my mom was always very good about, and both my parents, but about calling sort of family meetings. Mm-hmm. And you talk about family meetings in one of the episodes. And can you just sort of talk to us about the importance of family meetings? Maybe some of the things that you went through in the episode. It just seems like, especially as maybe we're a little early for meetings with Harper, but at some point, like sitting down and really having these
we kind of do one-on-ones.
And one of the things that struck me that you talked about is you don't make it like a business meeting where there's an agenda and like, here's the tough topic we're going to try that. You open it up very warmly and conversationally, but then you slip stuff in that's really important, right?
There you go. So I think first, right, let me kind of explain my family dynamics for the viewers, right? So we got married 7 years ago. I already had my son, Chris Jr. My wife already had 2 children, Heaven and Emmanuel. And then we had a young girl, Mina Khaleesi. So for any Game of Thrones fans, I did name my daughter Khaleesi. Her first name would have been Khaleesi, but not her middle name. Anyway, a little nerd fact about myself. But we walked into this relationship as a blended family. And immediately I saw, okay, there's a us versus them thing. And so my goal with the family meetings, really, Chris and Ann, was how do I take these people that, Chris and I were just guys when we had been living together as just him and my son for years, right? My wife had not had she had not had a male in the house for some time. So, and the kids were not used to it, right? So my goal was, how am I going to get us to be a congealed family unit? Because in the beginning, it was a lot of like us versus them. And it was a little things like, for example, my son, Chris, would say things like, my dad wants you, my dad, right? Mm-hmm. And I just said, no, Chris, like I'm everybody's dad now. So it's like, hey, dad, right? And so the family meetings really became a way, first of all, right now in the house, we have 6 people. So the family meetings became out of necessity. We've got 6 different schedules. So I want to make sure everybody knows everybody's schedule. But then also too, we're super busy, right? Like I work full time. I'm in my career in technology. My wife, she's an entertainment chef. She works California, New York, flying around the country. Our kids are in stuff. And so the family meetings for me became a time to pull everybody in. Now, as Chris said, me being IT professional, I said, look, we're going to have an agenda and the meeting will be 20 minutes. We're going to talk about these topics. And that was hell. The kids rolled their eyes. They hated it. Anytime I would call it for them. So, and I struggled for at least a good year or two with having the family meetings. But I said, look, I got to push on. And then I caught on to something, and it was a light bulb moment that I think most parents that we learned the hard way. I started to realize that every family, and even your family, Chris and Ann, every family has an organic flow, right? If you walk into a family's house, right, there's a flow. There's a certain room that everybody congregates in, right? There's a certain time of the day when the house is kind of jumping and lively, and a certain time it was in the quiet. So I said, let me kind of work with that flow. And so for my family, it wasn't a rigid, let's have a meeting. It was a more informal, like, hey guys, let's get together. We're going to have a very loose agenda, and we're going to cover like 3 things. We're going to cover, here's the schedule for the month. Now, we also have a shared Google Calendar. So I'll be like, hey, you got baseball practice, soccer practice, your mama's going out of town for a weekend and like that. The next thing is that we try to, and this is not a thing where we're using it for correction, but it's what can we do better at? But really, to a parent's eyes, it's like, hey kids, we need you. So like, for example, we sometimes have problems with the kids not cleaning their rooms properly. Okay. That's a great time to say, look, right? Not fussing at you, but let's talk about the why. Why does mom and dad want you to have a good room? Why am I trying to teach? I don't want you to clean your room just because it's clean. I want you as a young man or a young woman to learn these basic life skills. I just saw a meme yesterday, and somebody said, can we agree that for boys and girls, cooking and cleaning should be a basic life skill? And yeah, it should. Like, my son should know how to clean your room. I don't want him to get married and then his wife is like, hey, slob, right? and that third thing, and the third thing is having those kind of highlights. So Chris, you know immediately, right? This is that old school sandwich, good thing, bad thing, good thing, right? The kids don't know it, but we're implementing that at the end. Hey, what's everybody's highlights? What happened good this month? What's the upcoming good thing? And so what I found, y'all, is that over the course of time, following that organic flow and having those family meetings. Now, every family meeting ain't peaches and cream. Mm-hmm. There's some family meetings where we have really difficult conversations. But the beauty in that is that over time, we got closer and closer, and the line between them and us disappeared. There was no them and us. There was no my dad. It was, hey, we are the family, right? And so if something happens, as a sister, brother, mom, dad, I got your back. So, and I talk about in the podcast is that, man, the importance of these family meetings aren't just, for us to get together, but they're to celebrate your children. They're to put down the tablets, put down the phones, put down the Wi-Fi. Let's connect. What's going on with your life? It's even passed down family traditions, right? That there are stories that get told, there are things we laugh about, and there are traditions that happen that hopefully when my kids grow older, they have their own family meetings. So now we're starting a generation of goodwill that's passed down.
That's great. Yeah. It's really, setting the culture of the family, right? That's something you talk about on the podcast.
There you go.
All right. I have one more topic I wanted to cover. And I, honestly, I'm going to put the website back up again. That I really have enjoyed listening to it. So I'm going to encourage everybody to go check out the podcast. But we have talked on this episode, and we've actually had some guests talking about schooling and kids in school during COVID and the challenge with that. And you have an episode that you talk about that. And I'm just curious if you'll share some of the things that you shared on the podcast and what you've learned as kids are, at home, and it can be stressful. They're engaging on technology. I just thought some of the things that were really interesting, you even talked about, setting them up in the room and having snacks, like as if you were sending them off to school. And, if you can kind of share some things that you've learned through this very unusual time that we're going through with your kids.
Yeah. Well, so first thing I think I talk about too is I think as parents, I think we have to address as parents that this virtual COVID thing is a paradigm shift. And as parents, it is okay. It is okay to be frustrated. It is okay to, we are used to having a break, right? Our kids go to school and they're with someone else for 8 hours a day. And a lot of parents say, Chris, I don't know if I could do this, right? So just identifying that it's okay. Everyone is struggling to figure out what's the best setup. Now, what I've talked about for me, and this kind of goes back to even pre-COVID, okay, well, how, again, right, what's that organic flow, right? How can I make this work for my household and kids? The very first thing you got to do, and regardless of COVID or in school, every semester you got to set the expectation. One of the family meetings we had, and my wife actually, and this was some years ago, she was going back to school to finish her degree up. Anybody in my household that is going to school, I said, look, my expectation is that of excellence. That means that you're going to be getting straight A's across the board. Now, if you don't get straight A's, let's say you get a B or C, I'm not mad, but we need to sit down and we need to talk about what challenges you're having. Why are you getting a C in math? What do I need to do? Do I need to spend more time with you? Am I not, what do I need to do to get you up to that A, right? And I've found, y'all, that every semester, if you give a child a bar to try to reach, they're gonna try to reach it. Primarily, they're gonna try to reach it because of that internal need to impress their parents, right? Mm-hmm. But when you set the expectation, children inherently want to prove themselves, and you can utilize that proving in a good way. You want to prove yourself to me? Here's what I expect of you. Now, if you just have kids that just go to school and they have no expectation and they get straight C's, they're like, hey, I got C's. What's wrong with that, right? So the first thing I talk about is just having the expectation. The second thing too is just making sure you have the resources. And by resources, I mean, look, kid needs iPad, tablet, laptop. And I get that there's a cost around that. And I've even told parents, look, like, even if you have to, go get a tablet with a keyboard or one of those $199 Chromebook things, right? You've got to give them the resources to be able to succeed. And you have to know your kids, right? My kid needs snacks and water. I can't expect him to sit in the room for 8 hours a day like real school. I'm talking to the teacher about breaks. How can they get 5-10 minute breaks? And then after you set the expectation and after you have the resources, you really got to make it like real school. So our oldest daughter, Heaven, she's in college. She's in virtual school. My oldest son, Chris, he's 14. He started high school in virtual school, which is crazy for us. Mm-hmm. And then our third youngest, Emmanuel, is in virtual school. Every day in the morning time, just like they would have in regular school, they wake up, they come down, they have breakfast, and then at 8:30, they all scurry off to their rooms. And in their rooms are a desk, a laptop, a lamp, markers, pens. They have everything they need, and the environment, right? I talk a lot about how the environment has to be comfortable. And you have to also, be flexible of like, hey, look, like, I'm working from home, right? Daddy has to actually work from like 9 to 12. I take an hour break, and then from like 1 to 4, right? Some days I can, let's say, for example, in early, some days not. But also understanding that, look, these are just kids. It's new for them. Trying to incorporate something like, I've been able every day since COVID to have lunch with my kids, right? I take them on dog walks when they have like at-home PE, right? So, and again, right, these are just like some basic high-level items, right? But you really got to figure out what's organically and what's going to flow from my household.
All right.
Okay. All right. Well, Chris, it's been awesome having you today. I also, I just wanted to say that I'm continuing to enjoy following you on Twitter during Saints games.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. That is my one guilty pleasure on Sundays. Anybody that knows me, I am on Twitter and I tweet like a bat out of hell on Sundays. I had a guy come up to me in Rouse's, and this was last year, pre-COVID. He stopped me in Rouse's and said, "Chris, my wife and I follow you on Twitter, and his TV, his smart TV, he has my Twitter feed like on the right-hand side." I'm like, "Are you serious?" He's like, "Yes." He's like, "My wife and I we literally get on Twitter just to see you tweet." I'm like, "Man," and that was crazy to me.
Well, sometimes if we're on the West Coast, so we don't even see all the games. I don't have the direct TV package or anything. So sometimes during a Saints game, I'm only following you on Twitter. That's exactly how I get my play-by-play. It's
well, glad you guys enjoy it.
Great commentary. Go ahead.
All right. Before we wrap up, because we need a, what are 2 tips you'd give us for our 2-year-old?
For your 2-year-old. So I as well have a 2-year-old too. Her name is Chris Boudy. The 2 tips that I would definitely give anybody for a 2-year-old is tire them out and make sure they take naps. Right. I can't stress the importance enough of nap time. I try to literally wear her out. I take her on dog walks. I try to do everything with her. They've just got so much energy and they're so rambunctious. And then during that time, after lunch, we get her a good meal. She's out for a good 2-3 hours. And
that is bad.
Yeah, and that is, let me say that. Nap time is important not only for their developmental, but it's mommy and daddy time. That's my wife and that's the only time we have to talk, conversate, have coffee together, joke about our day. Because outside of that, she's, so nap time and playtime, you got to have that.
We feel you on that, on the nap time and on the, and we've only got her, but
literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, the problem is that she will probably grow up having a really clean room, because when we finally met each other, we both were disaster zones when it comes to cleaning our room, which works. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, she's already
when you have another,
she goes all over the house.
She walks around us and is like, pick this up, shut that door.
Yeah.
She's our Alex P. Keaton of clean.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Already. Mine is the opposite. Her older brother picks up her room for her, and she's like, I don't want to do that right now. I'm 2. I'm like, all right. I'll give you some time. I'll give you a couple years.
All right.
Well, good, Chris. It's awesome to see you. We're going to put a link to the podcast and to you on Twitter and everything once we post the show after it airs. But great to be with you. Hopefully sometime soon again in person back in New Orleans. But awesome to be with you today.
Yeah. Same as thank you for having me as a guest. I appreciate it.
Okay. Yeah, it's awesome. Thank you. All right.
Well, that was fun. I've really been enjoying his podcast and learning things. He's got like actionable things. He's sort of listening and does story time, and it's been a lot of fun. So it was nice to have Chris back.
All right.
So next week
we got a guest who couldn't make it for because of the hurricane, right?
Because of Hurricane Zeta. That's right.
Hurricanes wreaking havoc on the lifestyle business schedule. But we are excited to welcome
Speetree Wilson.
And she's going to be here to talk to us about her company, Resilia, which is disrupting the way that nonprofits are created and maintained. And she's going to talk to us also about what it's been like for her to raise money as an African-American female founder. And it is, she's one of the striking highlights in this world around being able to create and raise capital and breaking down a lot of the barriers that people face. And so I'm excited to hear very much from Savitri next week.
And we've used Resilia to form our nonprofit, the LaunchPad Foundation. It works great, and really excited to talk to her about everything she's been doing.
And such a great example of how you use technology to improve process.
Right.
All right.
All right. Well, we'll sign off for today. Thanks so much to everybody for tuning in, for Chris for joining us, to our producer Ariel, and we will see you guys next week
on the mainland.
So long.